According to the American Management Association, again, hardly a cell of reds, according to the American Management Association, 3/4 of major corporations engage in these kinds of employee surveillance. In other words, democracy stops at the lobby entrance. Now, knowing this history and its consequences enable us to see why so many liberal approaches to the corporation are misguided and toothless. Those who argue for socially responsible or soulful corporations are very well intentioned, but their fine intentions run up against two very intractable realities: the way capitalism is, and the statutory mandate that is laid on corporations to pursue profit only. In this case, the road to irrelevance is paved with good intentions. Diversity-based criticisms are equally misplaced. Saying that corporate boards and managerial suites should contain more women and racial minorities is like saying we should have more slaves among the master class. It does nothing to address the real problem, which is the structure of corporate governance itself. Indeed, it even obscures and preserves some of the basic tenets of corporate mythology: that the stockholders are the corporation, that they elect the board, that the board is a vigilant superintendent, and that non-managerial employees deserve their subaltern position. I also have to say that a lot of the criticism that emerges from Catholic social thought is often equally useless in the face of the corporation. So what's to be done? If we wish to recover this traditional conception of the corporation as a public institution directed to a common good, and if we wish to recover democratic self-government in the settings where we work, then we have to recognize that corporate personhood and its associated bundle of rights stand in the way. Thus, we should abolish the legal fiction of corporate personhood, strip corporations of their rights under the law, and even rethink what we mean by corporations and their internal governance. In other words, like any good radical position, mine appeals to tradition, and in this case to the tradition of American democratic thought. By abolishing corporate personhood and its rights, we can restore something of the old proprietary self-government on a new basis. First, it would be worthwhile to remember that we do have the right to revoke corporate charters. The right to revoke corporate charters is still present in all state constitutions. Tomorrow, you could do it. Tomorrow. State legislatures used to limit corporate existence to a fixed number of years, spell out permissible behavior, and hold owners liable for harms. There have been attempts to do this. In 1998, Loyola law professor Robert Benson and a coalition of public interest organizations petitioned the California State Attorney General to revoke the charter of UNICAL for environmental and human rights abuses. An even more vital governing power is the right to alter corporations themselves. We could, for example, limit or even prohibit the right of corporations like agribusinesses to own farms. But even more, we could relegate shareholder primacy to the dustbin of history. If corporations are public entities created to serve a common good, then shareholder claims are subsidiary to those of the public. And the range of that democratic public has to be extended to include the employees of the corporation itself. Here's where dispelling all this fetishism and enchantment has its greatest political impact. Any rational account of the corporation puts employees and not shareholders at the center. When you call to complain or when you buy a commodity, you are not talking to IBM or to Wal-Mart. You are talking to an embodied, incarnate human being. Yet in the legal and political universe of contemporary corporate governance, employees are almost invisible. When shareholders elect a CEO to govern a corporation, it is not shareholders who are being governed by the CEO. Employees are the ones who have their emails monitored, their phones tapped, and their urine explored. One could, in fact, compare the current wage contract to what was once called, in medieval law, the pactum subjectionis, a pact of subjection by which a people alienated their right to self-government and turned it over to the king. If these contracts are no longer considered legitimate in the political sphere, they should cease to be legitimate in the economic sphere. Even if we remain within the bounds of capitalism, this means that legislatures and courts should bestow on employees a considerable degree of privileges and protections that they are currently denied. And ultimately, I think employee rights can't be safeguarded except by firing the stockholders and giving ownership and control to the workers in the firm. In other words, the legal status of corporations and their employees arguably constitute the most unrecognized and yet urgent civil rights issue of our time. But that's going to force us to rethink, and rethink very hard, the very meaning of persons and rights, and to squarely face the consequences of a century and a half of economic transformation. We still have yet to even understand what's staring us right in the face, let alone address it. The eradication of corporate rights, the creation of a more humane and democratic workplace, is a step toward what King called a beloved community, and that we normally don't think has anything to do with our daily labors. It does. So I'm done. Questions? Comments? Abuse? Yeah.
Is there a means of connecting the dots between the conception of the corporation as a public institution and holding them accountable to allow things like the various amendment rights that you indicated that they daily violate? I'm just trying to envision what the legal logic might be that would get from point A to point B on that one. Because it doesn't seem that simply denying the corporation the legal status of personhood would all by itself automatically necessitate that particular...
No, they wouldn't. No, you're right. You're right. And you would get, I'm sure that you would get a lot of argument with the position I've taken that in fact, okay, say you do strip a corporation of legal personhood. Mm-hmm. You're right. It doesn't necessarily entail, right, that the whole train of those other changes that I'm advocating. The changes that I'm advocating, the rest of those are, I mean, I'll be honest, they're political and ideological reasons why I would want those. Mm-hmm. The legal, I'm not sure that you would have a legal logic, maybe as much as a philosophical logic, which would be one of democratic self-government. If you are going to say that you have the right to vote for this thing called elected officials, but they are only for this thing called the state, why is that logic not applied to the workplace?
Or at the very least,
right.
It would seem that we can suggest that there is a reductio ad absurdum with regard
right.
to indentured servitude of the employees.
Right.
I mean, there's certainly a
right.
philosophical logic to get from point A to
right.
point B there. But after hearing your very engaging rap on that history, I'm kind of interested in what to practically do tomorrow. You know?
I would say the one thing you could do tomorrow is, you know, call Robert Benson at Loyola and say, look, I mean, how for example, did you go about trying to get Unical mm-hmm. Under some kind of control? I mean, I'm sure that there are all sorts of corporations in Pennsylvania who could be targets for this, and you just kind of settle on one and ask Benson what he decided to do. And again, emphasize that even within the history of the Pennsylvania legislature, and even within the history of Pennsylvania state law, you have precedents to which you could appeal to say, look, I mean, corporations aren't natural entities. We made these things. And in fact, in the early 19th century, when we made them, we specified all kinds of limitations. Why exactly can't we do that now?